In a huge stadium, somewhere on Earth, the great Stupendo was about to perform his latest stunt. A hush fell over the crowd. The great Stupendo revved up his bike. He sped down the track like a bullet. He raced up the ramp like wildfire. He flew into the air like a jet plane. High over the cars he sailed. Then, smash! He crashed to the ground, bounced off his bike, and ripped his trousers. Everyone cheered wildly. Everyone, that is, except the great Stupendo's daughter, little Stupendo. "That's another costume I'll have to mend," she groaned. After the show, the Stupendos went home. As usual, the great Stupendo took a nap. He took his motorbike with him, because he always slept with his motorbike. Little Stupendo sulked. She wished she could sleep with a motorbike. In fact, she secretly wished she could do stunts as well. It was much more interesting than mending trousers. Little Stupendo went into the yard. She climbed the shed and pretended it was a skyscraper. She trained the cat and pretended it was a tiger. Then she peeped over at next door's washing line. "I could pretend that was a high wire," she thought. Mr. Chinspot lived next door. He was a tall, thin, suspicious old man. He preferred to be left in peace with his matchstick models. "What is it now?" he grumbled. "Please, Mr. Chinspot," asked little Stupendo, "can I walk along your washing line?" "Walk along my washing line?" replied Mr. Chinspot. "Is this some kind of trick?" Suddenly there was a loud scream. It came from the Stupendo's house. Little Stupendo went hurrying back inside, with Mr. Chinspot following. They found the great Stupendo in the bathroom, shaking all over. "A thing!" cried the great Stupendo. A thing in the plug hole!" Little Stupendo hardly dared look. Was it a snake? A scorpion? A sewer rat? Actually, it was none of these things. It was a tiny, harmless, frightened spider. Little Stupendo put a tooth mug over it and slid a postcard under it. Then she threw it out of the window. The great Stupendo calmed down. He turned to Mr. Chinspot with a solemn warning. "No one else must ever know about my secret fear," he said. A week passed. Then it was time for the great Stupendo's next stunt. For this he needed a barrel, so he went off to Barrels R Us to buy one. Little Stupendo went too. She had shopping of her own to do. Near the shops they saw a poster which made the great Stupendo's teeth gnash together. "See the one and only Mario Bravo in a one and only stunt spectacular." The great Stupendo looked both ways, then drew glasses on Mario Bravo and scribbled rubbish all over the poster. Mario Bravo, as you may have guessed, was the great Stupendo's greatest rival. Still sulking, the great Stupendo went into Barrels R Us. "I want a barrel," he grunted. "Please," he added. The saleswoman nodded. "Is that a barrel for beer?" she asked. "Or for rainwater?" "It is a barrel," replied the great Stupendo, "for myself." The great Stupendo measured himself against the barrels till he found one big enough to curl up in. Back home, the great Stupendo began to climb into the barrel. Then he had a nasty thought. What if there's a spider in the barrel? great Stupendo shuddered. He called for little Stupendo, but little Stupendo was still out shopping. There was only one person he could ask for help, Mr. Chinspot. As usual, Mr. Chinspot was working on a matchstick model. He wasn't at all happy to be disturbed. "Could you please climb into this barrel?" asked the great Stupendo. Mr. Chinspot was suspicious. "What for?" he grunted. "To check there are no things in it," replied the great Stupendo. "I hope this isn't some kind of trick," muttered Mr. Chinspot. The great Stupendo fetched a chair. Mr. Chinspot got onto it and, with some difficulty, climbed into the barrel. "Look very carefully," said the great Stupendo, "and in the meantime I shall put on my costume." The great Stupendo went off to change. Mr. Chinspot peered about in the dim light. It was hard even to see his own feet. Meanwhile, a van arrived outside. 2 workmen got out and went into the great Stupendo's house. "Ah," said the first, "this must be the barrel for the stunt." "Are you in there, great Stupendo?" asked the second. "Eh?" said Mr. Chinspot. "That's him," said the 2 workmen. They fitted the lid on the barrel and carried it off to their van. Mr. Chinspot didn't know what was going on. He banged and he shouted, but no one seemed to hear. Suddenly he felt himself moving, very fast. Then he heard the sound of an excited crowd. Next, he seemed to be floating, quite calmly and gently. "Actually," he thought to himself, "this is quite pleasant." Next second, the crowd went berserk as the barrel was brought to shore. "The great Stupendo is the greatest!" they cried. "Beat that Mario Bravo!" they cried. Suddenly, however, the cheers stopped, and there was a stunned silence. The man in the barrel was not the great Stupendo. Mr. Chinspot dusted himself down, shook himself out, and frowned a deadly frown. "The great Stupendo did this on purpose," he rasped. And with that, Mr. Chinspot vowed to get his revenge. Next day, the great Stupendo went to see Vanessa Gabble, his agent. Vanessa was the person who organised the stunts. Vanessa looked worried. She showed a newspaper to the great Stupendo. "Stupendous Bravo in stunt spectacular success." The next newspaper was even worse. "Gormless great Stupendo in waterfall fiasco." "There is only one thing for it," said Vanessa. "We must make sure your next stunt is so fantastic that Mario Bravo can never follow it." "But what shall I do?" asked the great Stupendo. Vanessa showed the great Stupendo a photo. It was a picture of a mighty canyon, Vulture Canyon, 100 meters wide and 4 kilometers deep. The great Stupendo gasped. "Have I got to jump that on my bike?" he asked. "Oh no," replied Vanessa. "You've got to walk across it on a wire." That was a truly scary thought, even for the great Stupendo. Back at home, the great Stupendo began to practice. First, he put a plank between 2 chairs and walked across that. Then he put a broomstick between 2 stepladders. "Now I need something more difficult," he said to himself. Out in the yard, little Stupendo was putting up a new clothesline. "Excellent," thought the great Stupendo. "I can use that." Little Stupendo wasn't very pleased when the Great Stupendo got up on her new line. He even used her clothesline pole for balance. He practiced all day till the sun went down, then went off to bed with his motorbike. "I'll show him," said Little Stupendo to herself. As the Great Stupendo snored in his bed, Little Stupendo walked the plank, then the broomstick. By the light of the moon, she crept outside and climbed onto the clothesline. Bit by bit, she learned how to keep her balance. She even waved to the crowd, except no one was watching. No one, that is, except Mr. Chinspot. "What are you up to, Little Stupendo?" he asked. Little Stupendo almost fell off the line. Then she saw it was only her old neighbour. "Haven't you heard?" she said. "Father is crossing Vulture Canyon on a high wire." Mr. Chinspot's brain began to tick over. A plan formed in his mind. It was the plan for his revenge. Next day, Mr. Chinspot paid a visit to 333 Sunset Villas. 333 Sunset Villas was the home of Mario Bravo. Mr. Chinspot rang the bell. As usual, Mario Bravo was riding his bike around the house. The bike had 2 huge mirrors, so Mario could watch himself everywhere he went. He bumped down the stairs, did a wheelie through the hall, and almost made Mr. Chinspot jump out of his socks. "You dude," he said. "What's up?" "I know a little secret that may interest you," said Mr. Chinspot. He leaned closer and whispered in Mario's ear. A big, broad smile spread across Mario's face. At last it was the morning of the great event. All was dim and still and silent at Vulture Canyon. Then, as if from nowhere, a helicopter appeared. In the helicopter were Mr. Chinspot and Mario Bravo. A rope ladder came out of the helicopter. Down the ladder climbed Mario Bravo. Mario was doing something to the high wire, something he wasn't supposed to be doing. Perhaps you think you know what Mario was doing. If so, write it on a postcard, put on a first-class stamp, and send it to yourself. That way you won't spoil it for anybody else. Dawn broke. People began to arrive. They came in their cars, their trucks and their caravans. They came on their bikes, their skateboards and their space hoppers. Some even came on their feet. The Great Stupendo appeared from his caravan. At first, Little Stupendo walked alongside him. Soon, though, the Great Stupendo was swallowed up in a crowd of reporters, supporters, and TV cameras. Little Stupendo watched anxiously as the Great Stupendo reached the very edge of the canyon. All around the world, on a million tellies, others were watching as well. Silence fell. The Great Stupendo took his first step. There was a little wobble. The Great Stupendo took a deep breath, steadied himself, and edged out over the mighty canyon. So far, so good. The Great Stupendo moved faster. With every step he became more confident. Soon he was halfway across. And then he stopped. Stopped dead. "Come on, Great Stupendo!" cried a voice in the crowd. But the Great Stupendo would not move another inch. Whispers went round the crowd. Has he lost his nerve? Did he look down? Is his shoelace undone? Suddenly, There was a great commotion. A little figure fought her way to the front of the crowd. In her hands was an old washing line pole. "It's little Stupendo!" they cried. "She's heading for the edge! Stop her, someone!" They were too late. Little Stupendo had reached the high wire. She balanced the pole in her hands and took 2 shaky steps onto the wire. "She'll never make it!" they cried. But little Stupendo had practiced hard. She fixed her eyes straight ahead and planted her footsteps perfectly. Soon she was moving as smoothly as a mountain goat. The great Stupendo nervously turned his head. He could not believe his eyes. Little Stupendo was coming to his rescue. Little Stupendo drew closer and closer and finally reached her father. Then, with one skillful flick of her pole, she knocked something tiny, dark and harmless off the wire. It wasn't even a real spider. It was a plastic one, the kind you get in joke shops. The great Stupendo breathed again. To a huge round of applause, he began to walk on. After such a scare, he could hardly wait to get to the other end. But little Stupendo wanted to stay up there forever. At last, they both reached the far side. Little Stupendo waved, and this time there really were people watching. 12.5 million to be exact. The great Stupendo took her hand and raised it high in the air. "I never could have done it without you," he said. "I know," replied little Stupendo. Not long after this day, a new poster went up around town. "The Great Stupendos! Greatest stunt double act in history!" Beat that, Mario Bravo.